A king is laughing on the Iron Throne when the sword finally falls. He never finishes the sound. Ned Stark did not simply kill his oldest friend that day, he carved the honor out of the Seven Kingdoms with one clean stroke and left it bleeding on the marble beside a murdered princess. Everyone remembers Eddard Stark as the man who died for telling the truth. But what if, on the one day it would have cost him everything to stay silent, his honor did not bend? What if, instead of swallowing the murder of Rhaegar's children the way history remembers, Ned Stark simply drew ice and took Robert Baratheon's head at the foot of his own throne? His face, when he finally looks up from the body, is already starting to disappear behind something colder. 15 years later, in that very same throne room, 100 swords will leave their scabbards at once, because a single killing was never enough to bury the debt it created. Welcome where the Quiet Wolf became the regicide regent, where Jaime Lannister wears a hostage's chain instead of a white cloak, where Jon Snow is a secret Ned Stark is willing to burn the North to protect. The night is dark and full of theories. What if the most honorable man in Westeros had answered the sack of King's Landing with a sword instead of silence? This is not the story of a hero. This is the story of a good man who commits the one unforgivable sin and spends the next 15 years discovering that some crimes, however righteous, never stop demanding payment. Before we witness the fall of the stag and the rise of the Dark Hand, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. If this video reaches 7,000 likes, we will immediately begin writing the sequel, The War of the Two Dragons. Also, join our Discord server, linked in the description below, to debate Westerosi lore with fellow fans. Now, adjust your armor, draw your blades, and let us travel to a throne room slick with royal blood, on the last day of a rebellion that was supposed to be already won. Act 1. The Red Judgment. Throne room of the Red Keep is thick with the copper tang of fresh blood and the acrid stench of guttering torches. Outside the shattered gates of the city, the fires of the sack still burn in a dozen districts, and the screaming has not yet entirely stopped. Ned Stark has ridden through streets slick with a different, older blood to reach this hall, past the broken bodies of men who surrendered and were killed anyway. And something in him that has held steady through an entire war is already beginning, quietly, to fracture. Robert Baratheon stands before the Iron Throne, laughing, a booming, hollow sound that echoes off the cold stone pillars and does not quite manage to sound like joy. At his feet lie two small bundles, wrapped in crimson Lannister cloaks. Blood has already begun to seep through the fine wool, pooling dark and slow across the ancient stone. Tywin Lannister stands beside the bodies, his golden armor spotless, his face a mask of perfect, aristocratic indifference, as though he has delivered a brace of hunting hounds rather than a murdered princess and her infant brother. He calls it, simply, a token of loyalty. Robert Baratheon says to Tywin Lannister with a jubilant, drunken grin, "A fine gift, Lord Tywin. The dragon seeds are extinguished. Now the realm can finally breathe easy, and I can finally sit that ugly chair without some silver-haired child growing up to challenge me for it in 15 years' time." Ned Stark stands 10 paces away, his traveling cloak still caked with the mud of a hard ride down from Storm's End, where his own host broke Lord Tyrell's siege and freed a starving garrison not a full turn of the moon past. His hands are trembling, but not from fear. His knuckles have gone white around the hilt of ice, the ancestral Valyrian greatsword that came to him only because Aerys Targaryen burned his father alive inside his own armor and hanged his brother beside him. He looks at the small, still bundles on the floor, then at the man he has called brother since they were boys together in the Vale, fostered under Jon Arryn's roof, closer than blood. He watches Robert's face, and what he sees there is not horror, it is relief, a silent, drunken endorsement of the murder of children, delivered with the same booming good cheer Robert once used to describe a fine kill in the Kingswood. Ned Stark says to himself in a whisper of frozen iron, "The man I loved died somewhere on the road to the Trident. This is not Robert anymore. This is only another mad king, wearing a kinder face." Ned moves. He does not shout a warning, and he does not hesitate long enough to think better of it. He steps forward with the terrible, unhurried grace of a winter storm arriving exactly on schedule. Robert is turning away already, reaching for a cup of wine a squire offers him, his guard entirely, fatally down, surrounded by men he trusts in a room he believes he has already won. Ned Stark says to Robert Baratheon, in a voice that cracks the air of the hall like breaking lake ice, "For the children, Robert. For the honor you just let Tywin Lannister butcher on your behalf, and thanked him for it." The Valyrian steel of ice screams free of its scabbard, a massive, glittering arc of smoke-dark metal catching the torchlight. Robert has perhaps half a second to register surprise on his broad, ruddy face. His mouth opens, but no words ever leave it. The blade passes through his neck as easily as it might pass through parchment. Robert Baratheon's head strikes the floor of the throne room with a dull, terrible thud. His massive body sways for one final heartbeat, blood erupting in a dark fountain, before it collapses in a heap at the very foot of the throne he had spent a year of war and rebellion fighting to claim. For a moment, there is nothing at all. No breath, no footstep, no crackle of torchlight. Only a silence so total it seems to swallow the Red Keep entire. And it is the loudest sound Ned Stark has ever heard in his life. In that single suspended heartbeat, hope for any easy peace in the Seven Kingdoms dies alongside Robert Baratheon, and something far more dangerous is born in its place to take that peace's throne. Tywin Lannister's hand moves toward his own sword, but the Northern Household Guard, led by the steady, loyal Jory Cassell, already have their steel leveled at the old lion's throat before his fingers ever close around the hilt. Wilmington, Ned Stark crosses the space between them and lays the flat of ice, still warm, still wet, against the side of Tywin Lannister's throat, close enough that a single twitch of his wrist would finish what Robert's death only started. Ned Stark says to Tywin Lannister, close enough that the old lion can feel the blades cold through his own beard, "Your gold will not wash a murdered princess's blood off this floor, Lord Tywin. It will not wash it off your hands, and it will not wash it off mine. Not now. I do not yet know who sits that chair when the sun rises tomorrow, but I promise you, it will not be decided by whoever draws steel first in this hall tonight. Take your hand off that hilt, bend that proud neck of yours, or you are next." Act 2. The Devil's Bargain. Invading the regicide spreads through King's Landing like wildfire through dry rushes, and the city becomes a powder keg wrapped in a thin, trembling silence. Ned Stark does not sit upon the Iron Throne. He stands before it instead, a grim, exhausted sentinel. And in the first hour after Robert's death, he does not yet dare call himself anything grander than what he actually is. The only armed man in the room who still has his wits about him. Ned Stark says to Jory Cassell, his voice hoarse with the enormity of what his own hand has just done, "Prohibits seal every gate of this castle. Let no one in, and for the love of every god you still believe in, let no one out until I understand exactly how much of this city still answers to House Lannister's gold rather than its own good sense. Is escorted to a private chamber in chains, though he wears them the way another man might wear a particularly fine cloak. An inconvenience, not a humiliation. He is not afraid. He is calculating, and calculation, in Tywin Lannister, is always more dangerous than fear. Ned Stark says to Tywin Lannister, standing over him with a hollow, exhausted stare, "You murdered 2 children to buy Robert's favor, and delivered them to him wrapped in your own house colors, like a hunter presenting a brace of rabbits. Robert is dead now. I could hang you from the walls of this city by morning, and I promise you every small folk within a mile of these gates would cheer themselves hoarse watching you drop." Tywin Lannister says to Ned Stark, with a chilling, unbothered calm, "You could, Lord Stark, and by the time my brother Kevin hears of it, 30,000 Westermen will be marching on this city to burn it to its foundations and salt the ground beneath. You have no allies here. The North is weeks away on a good horse. The Riverlands are exhausted from a war they only just finished fighting. You are a kingslayer, sitting alone in a city that does not yet know whether to fear you or butcher you in the street. You need the lion far more than the lion needs your mercy." Ned Stark closes his eyes for a long moment. He thinks of his own new bride, Catelyn Tully, already carrying his first child, whom he left behind at River Run for their wedding, before riding north to gather his banners and then south again to war. a young wife he has not seen in the better part of a year, who by now must surely have completed the long journey to Winterfell to take up her place as its new lady. He thinks of the fragile, unfinished piece he has just shattered with a single stroke of Valyrian steel, and of how very much blood it will take to hold the pieces together. Imperialism. Ned Stark says to Tywin Lannister, "I will not hand you this throne, Tywin, but I will give you a leash long enough that you may convince yourself it is a partnership. Your son Jaime stood in this hall in his white cloak and watched 2 children die without lifting a finger to stop it. He is no longer fit to wear that cloak, and he will not wear it again. He will be stripped of his Kingsguard vows, and when I have a daughter of my own body old enough to wed, he will marry her and live the rest of his days as my hostage son in every way but name. Casterly Rock's gold and swords will stand behind my regency, or Jaime Lannister's life will answer for it personally, by my own hand." Lannister's pale green eyes flare just once, with a brief and murderous fury, before settling back into their familiar, glacial calculation. Tywin Lannister says to Ned Stark, "Dike of ice and gold, promised before the bride is even born. You have learned the shape of this game remarkably quickly for a man who claims to despise it, Lord Stark. Very well. The West will stand behind the wolf, for now." Jory Cassell drags Jaime Lannister forward within the hour, still in his white Kingsguard cloak, and tears the garment from his back in the throne room itself, in front of every remaining gold cloak and northern spear still standing over Robert's cooling body. Ned has ordered Tywin brought up from his chamber in chains to watch it happen, a small and entirely deliberate cruelty of his own. In place of the cloak, Jory clasps a plain iron chain link around Jaime's wrist, tethered to nothing yet but the promise of everything still to come. Jaime says not one word through the whole of it, but something in his green eyes goes very still and very cold, the look of a man calculating, patiently, exactly how many years it might take before that chain finally comes loose in his own hand. Ned Stark does not watch Jaime's face while the cloak comes off. He watches Tywin Lannister's instead, searching that carved granite mask for even the smallest crack. He finds one, the barest flicker at the corner of the old lion's jaw, gone again almost before it arrives, and understands that this is the last wound Tywin Lannister will ever be careless enough to let him see. Outside the chamber, in the corridor still slick with the night's spilled blood, Ned finds Grand Maester Pycelle waiting for him, wringing his soft, ink-stained hands. Grand Maester Pycelle says to Ned Stark, his voice trembling between fear and flattery in equal measure, "My lord, the small council will need to be reconstituted immediately, and a formal declaration sent to every corner of the realm before rumor does the crown's work for it, far less kindly than the truth might. What, precisely, shall I tell the ravens to say?" Ned Stark says to Grand Maester Pycelle, his exhaustion audible in every word, "Tell them the truth, Pycelle, or as near to it as this city can survive hearing. Tell them King Robert Baratheon is dead by my own hand, for crimes against 2 children that no crown should ever have the power to forgive. Tell them I hold the realm now as protector, until such time as a rightful and legitimate heir can be found and confirmed by more than one exhausted Northman's sword. And tell them, quietly, that any lord who marches on this city before that heir is found will be marching against the North, the Riverlands, and whatever remains of the Stormland's good sense, all at once." Pycelle bows low and hurries away to his ravens, and Ned Stark is left alone in the corridor, with Robert's blood still drying on the hem of his own cloak, wondering, not for the last time, whether a throne held together by threats and unproven bloodlines can survive even a single season, let alone a reign. At Storm's End. The wind howls without mercy around the ancient, drum tower walls of Storm's End, carrying salt spray and the first cold breath of an early autumn storm off the narrow sea. Stannis Baratheon has only just been freed from the long, starving siege that held this castle through the worst of the war. Freed, bitterly enough, by Eddard Stark's own relief host, arriving to break Lord Tyrell's lines not a full turn of the moon past. He stands alone on the battlements now, staring out at the dark water, a crumpled raven's message still clenched in one fist. The man who saved his life from starvation not 4 weeks ago has killed his brother. Stella Baratheon says to Sir Davos Seaworth, his voice like two grinding millstones. He was my brother, Davos. Flawed, yes. A drunken fool more often than not, and no great mind for ruling. But he was blood. And Ned Stark, the one man in this realm Robert loved without reservation, above his own crown. The very same man whose spears broke Mace Tyrell's siege and pulled me back from starvation not a month past. Butchered him in the light of day, in his own throne room, and dressed the killing up as justice. Ned Stark fed me when I was dying of hunger behind these walls, Davos. Now I intend to feed him to the crows. Shalmy, Sir Davos Seaworth says to Stannis Baratheon, his weathered face heavy with concern. The letter claims Lord Stark acted for the murdered Targaryen children, Your Grace, that he could not stomach what Tywin Lannister had done in Robert's name, or what Robert's own laughter over the bodies revealed him to be. Stannis Baratheon says to Sir Davos Seaworth, his jaw clenched so tight it seems it might crack like old stone, I do not care one whit for his excuses, Davos. A man does not try his king in a private court of one and pass sentence with a sword before the accused has even finished raising his wine cup. Whatever Ned Stark believes he has purchased with Robert's blood, he has committed regicide, plain and simple, and the throne he now guards belongs to House Baratheon, by every law this realm has ever recognized, which makes it mine, as the elder surviving brother, not some Northman's to bestow upon whichever candidate soothes his own conscience. Send word to every captain and every keel still loyal to our house, from Estermont to Tarth, and every cove along this coast between. We sail for King's Landing the moment enough hulls answer the summons. I will have Eddard Stark's head on a spike above that gate, and I will see that chair of swords finally melted down for something more honest, like nails. Transitioning, let us examine for a moment the cold and uncomfortable truth buried inside Stannis' fury. He is not entirely wrong to be furious, and that is precisely what makes this rebellion within a rebellion so dangerous. Ned Stark has not simply removed a bad king, he has set a precedent that any lord with a sharp enough blade and a righteous enough grievance may end a reign whenever his own honor demands it. And Stannis Baratheon, of all men in the Seven Kingdoms, has built his entire identity around the unbending, uncompromising rule of law. He sails against the capital not merely for vengeance, but because he genuinely believes that if regicide is allowed to stand unanswered even once, the entire fragile architecture of Westerosi succession collapses into permanent, bloody chaos. Act 4. The brocare of documents, and the number of chores, and sorting that scales and flows that he set a bigger rule and unbending an air. In Winterfell, the news arrives like the first blizzard of a hard winter, burying the whole castle in a silence no one quite knows how to break. Catelyn Stark receives the raven in her solar, her hand instinctively going to the swell of her belly, heavy now at the child who will one day be Robb. She reads the message twice, then a third time, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible on a fourth reading. Catelyn Stark says to Maester Wallace, her voice barely above a whisper, "My husband has killed the king. My husband, who left this castle swearing he only meant to fight beside his friend and bring his sister's bones home from the south, has killed the king with his own hands, and now stands as regent over the Seven Kingdoms in a boy Targaryen's name." Maester Wallace says to Catelyn Stark, choosing his words with the particular care of a man delivering news that could unmake a house. The letter says, "Lord Stark acted to avenge 2 murdered children, my lady. It says nothing yet of who will rule once the dust settles, only that the North's banners are requested to reinforce his position, should Lord Stannis choose war over grief." Catelyn Stark looks out over the frozen courtyard of Winterfell, one hand still resting protectively over her unborn child, and feels the full, crushing weight of what she has married into settle onto her shoulders for the very first time. She has wed the most honorable man in the Seven Kingdoms, and in a single heartbeat of fury, on a blood-slick throne room floor, he has made every Stark who comes after him into the children of a kingslayer. Catelyn Stark says to Maester Wallace, her voice steadying by sheer force of will, "Sends Bannerman, the North answers for its own, Maester, whatever the South decides to call my husband's crime. Ned did not do this for a crown, I have known him long enough already to know that much of his heart, if nothing else. Muster what men Winterfell can spare and send them south under Sir Roderick's banner. Whatever is coming for my husband, it will not find him standing entirely alone. All across the north, that same decision, to answer the call rather than abandon the wolf to his fate, is being repeated in dozens of keeps up and down the King's Road, from the umbers in the snow-locked last hearth to the silent, watchful halls of the Dreadfort, where Roose Bolton reads the very same letter by candlelight and finds himself smiling, cold and new, for the first time in a very long while. Not from loyalty, but from the simple, useful knowledge that the Quiet Wolf has finally shown the realm exactly how sharp his teeth can be. None of the great lords of the North particularly care whether Ned Stark sits a Targaryen boy or a Baratheon corpse's memory upon the Iron Throne. They care only that he is a Stark, and that the South, once again, is trying to punish the North for an honor it does not understand and never will. Act 5. The Siege of the Blackwater. The horizon off King's Landing's harbor becomes, within the season, a dark and growing line of black sails. Stannis Baratheon's fleet has arrived at last, and the mouth of the Blackwater Rush is transformed overnight into a forest of masts and grim, silent purpose. Inside the city, Ned Stark prepares what defense he can, commanding an uneasy coalition of gold cloaks, a hardened northern garrison sent south by his wife, and the deeply reluctant remaining soldiers of House Lannister, who fight now because their liege lord has ordered it, not because any of them particularly wish Eddard Stark to survive the week. Jaime Lannister stands beside him on the ramparts of the Mudgate, no longer dressed in Kingsguard white. He wears a plain gray surcoat now, stripped of every honor he was ever given, his handsome face gone bitter and hollow-eyed. He has become, in the space of a single season, a husband promised to a girl not yet born, and a sworn servant to the man who beheaded his own king in front of him. Jaime Lannister says to Ned Stark with a mocking, jagged laugh, "You look tired, Lord Regent. Does the crown you refuse to wear still feel heavy on a head that isn't even carrying it? Or is it simply Robert's ghost, standing on these battlements with the rest of us, waiting to see if you choke on this the way you very nearly choked on your own sword arm that night?" Ned's turning to look at him. "Robert's ghost will never leave this city, Jaime, not for as long as I draw breath in it. But Stannis is not a ghost. He is real, and his fleet is real, and it is sitting in our harbor right now. If this city falls today, you die alongside every soul inside these walls. Promised bride or no promised bride. So I will ask you once, plainly, will you fight?" Jaime Lannister says to Ned Stark, drawing a sword that no longer bears any royal sigil at all. "I have always been rather good at killing Baratheons, as it happens. Let the younger brother come and find that out for himself." The northern garrison Catelyn sent south under Sir Roderick's banner reaches the city gates barely a day before those first black sails appear, gray-cloaked riders half dead from a hard ride down the King's Road, and their arrival alone is enough to convince half the wavering gold cloaks that the Wolf's regency might actually survive the week after all. The battle that follows is a nightmare of fire, mud, and screaming steel. Men storm the Mudgate in wave after wave, while northern archers rain down shafts wrapped in burning pitch from the walls above. Ned Stark fights in the thick of the worst of it, leading a desperate sortie into the churned red mud of the riverbank, moving like a man who has stopped caring very much whether he survives the day, so long as the city does. He crosses blades with Sir George Morrigan in the shallows, the water around their boots turning the color of rust. Ned Stark says to Sir George Morrigan as their swords meet, "The old law died the moment Tywin Lannister laid 2 dead children at Robert's feet, and Robert laughed. There is only what is left of justice now, sir, and I intend to keep hold of it a while longer." The final roaring effort, Ned drives his blade through the knight's breastplate, and there is no grief in his face when the man goes still, no flicker of the mercy that once made him argue with a king over 2 murdered children, rather than simply looking away. The man who could not stomach Robert's laughter over the dead now kills a stranger in the mud without a single change of expression, and does not notice, in the heat of the moment, exactly how quickly that particular kind of silence has come to fit him. Above the battle, the sky over the harbor suddenly turns a sickly, unnatural shade of green. Tywin Lannister, watching from the safety of the Red Keep's high windows, has ordered the last hidden reservoirs of the Mad King's wildfire opened and set loose upon the packed enemy ships in the bay. The harbor detonates in a single, apocalyptic column of emerald flame. Stannis' fleet becomes, within minutes, a wall of screaming fire and boiling water. The siege breaks. But as the smoke finally begins to clear over the ruined harbor, Ned Stark looks out at the charred, smoking wreckage of the Baratheon invasion fleet and understands, with a cold and settling dread, that he has just saved a city by burning half its harbor and several thousand men alive to do it. Stannis Baratheon himself is not among the dead. His own flagship, crippled and burning at the stern, limps out of the bay under cover of the smoke and the coming dark. He does not run home to Storm's End. He makes instead for Dragonstone, the strongest sea fortress in all of Blackwater Bay, and, since the last 2 Targaryen children were smuggled out of it to Essos, an empty one. And there he settles in to rebuild, and to wait, with the terrible patience of a man who has never once in his life let go of a grievance. Only when the harbor has stopped burning does Ned Stark finally turn to the one duty he has left undone since the day the city fell. He rides south with 6 companions, down into the red waste of Dorne, to a lonely watchtower in the Prince's Pass, where 3 of the Mad King's Kingsguard have stood their vigil over something they will not name. What happens at that tower never finds its way into any chronicle. Ned comes back north months later with 1 companion instead of 6, a new stillness in him that no one who knew him before can quite account for, and the newborn boy carried against his chest, whom he names John and calls, to every soul who ever asks him afterward, his own bastard son. He does not tell Catelyn what his sister asked of him in that room that smelled of blood and winter roses. He does not tell anyone. He simply carries it, the way he has by now learned to carry everything else. 15 years pass. Regency holds, though it never once stops feeling, to the man at its center like a debt-collecting interest. In the first uncertain years, half the great houses of the realm press their own candidates and their own daughters upon Ned Stark, each one certain that the regicide wolf must eventually need a crown of his own to legitimize the blood already on his hands. Ned refuses every single offer. He has seen up close exactly what an ambitious man looks like sitting that chair, and he wants no part of becoming a second version of the same mistake. In the end, it is precisely because Viserys Targaryen is so far away, so powerless, and so easily managed from a distance with nothing more than a steady trickle of gold, that the lords of the realm slowly, reluctantly, settle on him as the least dangerous name to eventually put back on the throne. A restored dragon, everyone quietly agrees, is at least a known and ancient quantity. A northern kingslayer crowning himself is a wound that might never stop bleeding. Let us sit with an uncomfortable question for a moment, because it is the same question half of King's Landing has been quietly asking itself for 15 years without ever daring to say it aloud in Ned Stark's hearing. A man kills a king to stop a tyrant. He holds the throne afterward, not through any crown or any law, but through fear, through hostages, through a Kingsguard reduced to a single chained prisoner, and a small council too frightened to contradict him. He keeps his own nephew's parentage a secret for a decade and a half, not entirely out of love, if we are honest with ourselves, but because a hidden dragon's blood claim is the single most valuable card left in his hand, should the realm ever turn against him. 15 years of exactly that pattern begins to look, from a certain uncharitable angle, very much like the exact shape of the tyranny it was supposed to prevent. Did Eddard Stark save the honor of the 7 kingdoms the night ice took Robert's head? Or did he simply become, one quiet compromise at a time, the very thing he once could not stomach watching Robert become? Ned Stark rules the 7 kingdoms in a dead king's name and an absent Targaryen prince's honor, aging visibly under the weight of a crown he still refuses, to this day, to physically wear. He keeps, in a locked chest at the foot of his own bed, the cloak he wore the night he killed Robert, the old bloodstain gone black and stiff with age, never once sent to be cleaned. He tells no one why he keeps it. He does not entirely know himself, except that some part of him has always understood that a stain scrubbed away is a debt a man can pretend he never owed. In Winterfell, Robb Stark grows from the unborn child in his mother's belly into a young lord who has spent his entire life being called, in half the North's taverns, the son of the regicide wolf, a title he has learned to wear the way his father wears ice, as a burden that is also, somehow, a kind of honor. Sansa Stark is born and grows and is raised from her earliest years knowing precisely which Lannister lion she is destined to marry, and precisely why. And far to the north, at Castle Black, a solemn, dark-haired boy the realm knows only as Ned Stark's bastard son takes the black vows of the Night's Watch on his 15th name day, carrying a secret in his blood that even he does not yet know he carries, a secret his own father has, by now, learned to think of less as a promise kept to a dying sister and more as the last loaded card he still holds against the day the dragons come home. Across the narrow sea in the free cities of Essos, two exiled Targaryen children grow into a frightened, dangerous young man and his quiet, watchful younger sister, kept alive for 15 years on a slow, steady drip of Lannister gold that Tywin Lannister has never once stopped sending, not out of loyalty to House Targaryen, and certainly not out of mercy, but because a desperate, half-mad prince in exile is the single cheapest insurance policy the old line has ever purchased against the day Eddard Stark's regency finally, inevitably, cracks. At Castle Black, on the night before his own vows, the boy the realm has always known as Jon Snow stands alone in the shadow of the wall's foot, his back to the ice, looking south toward a capital he has never seen, and a father he has not laid eyes on in 3 years. Maester Aemon, blind and ancient, finds him there in the freezing dark, guided by a steward's arm and by the particular instinct of a man who has spent a lifetime knowing exactly where the unhappy ones go to stand. Freedom's Maester Aemon says to Jon Snow, "You have the look of a man saying goodbye to something, boy, and not merely to your name." Jon Snow says to Maester Aemon, "Exercise father is the regicide wolf, Maester. Half the realm calls him a monster in the same breath they call him a savior. I used to think, growing up in his shadow at Winterfell, that taking the black would finally let me become simply a man, judged for my own sword arm and nothing else. Tonight I find myself wondering if a name like Snow was ever going to be quiet enough to hide in." Reinforces Maester Aemon says to Jon Snow, his voice soft and strange with some private unshared grief of his own. "Some names, child, are not given to hide a man. They are given to protect him, until the day he is strong enough to carry the truth they were built to cover. I hope for your sake that day is a very long way off yet." Jon takes his vows the following dawn, kneeling in the snow before the old god's weirwood that grows just past the wall's shadow. And if some part of him feels, in that moment, the faint and unexplainable pull of a blood he does not yet know he carries, he tells himself it is only the cold, and says nothing of it to anyone. On Dragonstone in those same 15 years, Stannis Baratheon has not once stopped waiting. His fleet was ash in the Blackwater, but a lord who has spent his whole life being overlooked by history knows better than most how to survive on patience alone. A red priestess from Ashai, drawn across the narrow sea by rumors of a bitter, righteous king burning with a grievance the Lord of Light might yet find useful, kneels before his brazier one autumn evening and shows him visions in the flame that have nothing at all to do with wildfire. Melisandre says to Stannis Baratheon, "I have seen a false dragon sitting a stolen throne, my king, propped up by northern honor and Lannister gold in equal, poisoned measure. I have seen the wolf who killed your brother grown old and gray, still guarding a secret that is not truly his to guard. The Lord of Light did not let your fleet burn to ash 15 years ago so that you could simply give up the fight, Stannis Baratheon. He let it burn so that you would learn, at last, to wait for the fire that actually matters." Stannis Baratheon says to Melisandre, his voice colder and harder than it has been in 15 long years of quiet, simmering defeat. "Then let us see exactly how patient a false dragon's throne can afford to be, my lady. Because I have not forgotten a single hour of these 15 years, and I do not intend to forget the debt Eddard Stark still owes my house." Act 6. The Arrival of the Beggar King. A ship out of Essos finally docks at the harbor of King's Landing, carrying the self-proclaimed rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, Viserys Targaryen, and his quiet, silver-haired younger sister, Daenerys. They arrive with a small, hungry company of sellswords, paid for, as they have always been paid for, by gold that traces back, through 3 different moneylenders and a small fortune's worth of discretion, to Casterly Rock. Forging Viserys Targaryen enters the Great Hall of the Red Keep for his first formal audience with the restless, darting eyes of a man who has spent his whole life certain that every shadow in every room is plotting against him. Because for most of his life, several of them genuinely have been. He looks upon the Iron Throne itself with a hunger that borders on something closer to madness than ambition. Viserys Targaryen says to Ned Stark, who kneels before him with a heavy, unreadable heart, "Rise, Lord Stark. You have done your duty admirably, it seems. You cut the usurper down before he ever warmed my family's seat, and you have kept it from me across 15 long years of exile. I expected to find some brute of a northern executioner waiting for me in this hall. Instead, I find a remarkably loyal dog." Ned Stark rises slowly and says to Viserys Targaryen, "I did not do this for you, your grace, nor for your father's memory, nor for any dragon banner. I did it for 2 children who never had the chance to grow old enough to disappoint anyone. And I have spent 15 years since trying to keep this realm from tearing itself apart over the debt that single act of justice left behind." Viserys Targaryen says to Ned Stark, his thin mouth curling into something that only resembles a smile, "Balance. How very northern of you. Let me show you what balance actually looks like, Lord Stark." Stannis Baratheon still draws breath and still styles himself a king from that miserable rock of his. The Tyrells sit silent and uncommitted in the Reach, waiting to see which way the wind turns before they kneel to anyone. I want heads. I want this city to smell of blood and fear until every last man who ever raised a cup to the usurper's memory understands, in his bones, exactly whose blood sits that throne now. Ned Stark feels a deep, sickening dread settle into his chest, old and familiar as an ache in a long-healed wound. He glances past Viserys to where Daenerys stands quietly near the doorway, her violet eyes lowered, her whole small frame carrying the particular stillness of someone who has learned, across a great many hard years, exactly how loudly it is safe to breathe in her brother's presence. Ned Stark says to himself, in the silence of his own mind, "I traded one drunken, laughing king for a mad, hungry boy who has never once in his life been made to answer for anything. 7, save me. What have I actually done all these years?" The same evening, once the audience hall is emptied and the new king has retired to drink alone, Ned finds Daenerys standing by herself on a small balcony overlooking the Blackwater, the first time all day, and very probably the first time in her whole life, that anyone has spoken to her without her brother standing between them. Ned Stark says to Daenerys Targaryen, "You have said perhaps 10 words all day, princess. I wonder if that is simply your nature, or a skill you learned the hard way, the same as I learned mine." Daenerys Targaryen says to Ned Stark, her violet eyes steady and far older than her years, "My brother believes silence is weakness, Lord Stark. I have found, across a great many cities and a great many frightened nights, that it is usually the opposite. You killed a king to avenge 2 children you never met. I have spent my whole life being kept alive as a coin my brother intends to spend on a throne. I am not entirely certain either of us actually wants. I wonder, some nights, which of us made the crueler bargain with this realm." Ned Stark says to Daenerys Targaryen, studying her face for a long moment, "I could not tell you, princess. I have been asking myself a version of that same question for 15 years, and I confess, I am no closer to an honest answer than the night I first asked it." She says nothing more, only inclines her head to him with a grace that seems, disquietingly, to belong to someone twice her age, and returns to her chambers before her absence can be noticed and reported to her brother as one more small betrayal to add to his ledger. The following morning, Varys watches Viserys hold his first small council with the weary, professional patience of a man who has personally survived 1 mad king, 1 regicide, and 15 years of a regency that was never supposed to last a season, and who fully expects this particular reign to be shorter than any of them. Viserys Targaryen says to the assembled council, his eyes bright and restless. I want the red wine fleet at the arbor brought to heel within the year, and Highgarden kneeling behind it. I want Dornish spears sworn to my banner by spring, and I want a proper accounting, Lord Varys, of every man in this city who ever raised a cup to the usurper Robert's memory, so that I may know precisely whose loyalty was purchased, and whose was merely frightened into silence. Varys says to Viserys Targaryen, bowing with his usual soft, unreadable courtesy. Your Grace's ambition does the Targaryen name proud. I shall begin such an accounting at once, though I would gently counsel patience regarding the Reach and Dorne both. 15 years of careful peace are not so easily traded for 15 days of enthusiasm, however well-deserved that enthusiasm may be. Targaryen says to Varys, his voice sharpening with the particular impatience of a man who has waited his entire life to give orders and finally can. Flexibility, I did not survive 15 years of exile and beggary to be counseled into patience by a eunuch who spent that same 15 years growing fat in another man's court, Spider. See that it is done. Black Varys bows again and withdraws without another word, and if his soft face betrays nothing at all of what he is actually thinking, Ned Stark, watching from across the hall, finds himself suddenly and profoundly certain that the Master of Whispers has already begun quietly weighing which of the realm's great houses might be persuaded to prefer a different king entirely. That same afternoon in the private solar he still keeps his hand and regent in all but name, Ned receives Robb, now a young man grown, all his mother's tully coloring, the auburn hair and the bright blue eyes, worn over his father's heavy northern shoulders and his father's careful, watchful stillness. Freshly arrived from Winterfell, for the new king's formal welcoming feast still to come. Robb Stark says to Ned Stark, They call you the regicide wolf and half the ends between here and the neck, father. Some of them spit when they say it. Some of them raise a cup. I have never once heard you explain to me in all these years which of them you believe is right. Ned Stark, his gray eyes tired in a way that has nothing to do with the late hour. Wolver of them is right, Robb. I did not kill Robert to become a hero, and I have not spent 15 years holding this throne together to become a villain. I did it because a man has to draw a line somewhere, even if drawing it costs him everything he ever believed about his own honor. I hope to every god still listening that you never find yourself standing where I stood that night. But if you ever do, I hope you have the courage to draw the same line, whatever it costs you afterward. Sansa Stark, not yet 14 and already dressed for a wedding that will take place within the month, finds her father alone in the Godswood that same night, sitting beneath the pale branches of King's Landing's own small, transplanted heart tree. Sansa Stark says to Ned Stark, Everyone at court still calls it a marriage of ice and gold, father, as though I am a clever line in one of the songs, rather than a girl who has known her entire life exactly which stranger she was promised to before she ever learned his face. Do you truly believe he will be kind to me? Ned Stark says to Sansa Stark, drawing his daughter gently down to sit beside him among the red leaves. I believe Jaime Lannister has spent 15 years learning, the hard way, precisely what it costs a man to stand silent while someone he loves is destroyed in front of him, sweet one. I do not know if that makes him kind. I know it makes him understand kindness's absence better than almost any man in this city. And that is not nothing, in a place like this one. I am sorry, Sansa. I never wanted your marriage to be a debt I owed for a war I started. But I promise you, whatever else I have become in this city, I have never once stopped trying to make certain the price of my choices fell as lightly on you and your brothers as I could possibly arrange it. Sansa says nothing for a long moment, only leans her head against her father's shoulder, the way she used to as a small girl in Winterfell's own colder, more honest Godswood. And for just that one quiet hour before the candles must be lit again, the regicide wolf is simply a father, and nothing else the songs will ever bother to remember him as. Act 7. The Streens, the Late. Act 8:16, 1939. Nearly a fortnight later, the formal feast finally held for the new king's return doubles, by careful design, as Sansa Stark's own wedding feast. One grand occasion instead of two, Ned reasons, is one fewer chance for the fragile peace of the city to crack under the weight of celebration. It is a strange, brittle affair regardless. Viserys sits upon the Iron Throne itself, drinking far more than a man in his position ought to, shouting at servants over imagined slights, while the assembled lords of the realm watch him with the carefully blank faces of people trying to calculate how quickly this particular storm is going to break. In the shadow of a stone archway at the edge of the hall, Varys the Spider draws Ned quietly aside. Varys says to Ned Stark in a hushed, urgent whisper, "You have built a house of glass over 15 very careful years, my lord, and the king you fetched to live inside it is already throwing stones at the walls." Ned Stark says to Varys, his voice low, "I will manage him, Lord Varys. I have managed worse men than Viserys Targaryen in my time," Varys says to Ned Stark, and for once there is nothing but genuine, sorrowful pity behind his soft, round face. "Kennedy has learned a secret, my lord. One of my little birds was careless, or perhaps simply too thorough for anyone's good. He knows about the boy at the wall, the one the whole realm has always believed is your bastard son, Jon Snow." Ned Stark goes rigid where he stands. The whole grand hall seems, for one suspended moment, to tilt very slightly beneath his feet. Ned Stark says to Varys, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, "Jon is nothing to that boy on the throne. He took the black vows this past year. He is a brother of the Night's Watch, sworn and done with the rest of this realm's politics forever." Varys says to Ned Stark, "Bronze did not see a sworn brother of the Watch, my lord. He sees a rival claim wearing a bastard's name as a disguise. He knows, or believes he knows, that Jon is truly the son of Prince Rhaegar and your sister Lyanna, born in secret and hidden under your own roof for 15 years. He knows that a true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen's blood has a claim to that chair that makes his own look like a beggar's boast by comparison. And not an hour ago, I watched him send a private order to the captain of his gold cloaks." Before Ned can answer, the great doors at the far end of the hall burst open. Viserys Targaryen rises from the Iron Throne, one trembling finger leveled across the length of the feast toward Ned Stark. Viserys says to the assembled court in a high, hysterical shriek, "Treason! The regent has been hiding a pretender under his own roof for 15 years. A dragon seed, kept alive in the snow to one day steal what is mine. Sir Jaime, arrest your father by marriage this instant, and someone bring me the head of the bastard called Jon Snow, or I swear by every god old and new, I will burn the north until its ice turns to steam and its wolves have nowhere left standing to howl." The hall falls into a silence far more dangerous than any of the shouting that came before it. 100 lords who have spent 15 years quietly wondering whether Eddard Stark's regency would end in fire or simply fade into peaceful old age now find themselves calculating, in the space of a single held breath, exactly which side of this room they intend to still be standing on by morning. Sansa Stark stands frozen near the high table in her wedding silks, one hand still resting on Jaime's arm from the last dance they shared not an hour before, and watches her whole carefully arranged world, her father, her new husband, her half-brother somewhere far to the north who has never done a single thing to deserve this, come apart in the space of a single drunken sentence. Daenerys Targaryen, near the doorway, closes her violet eyes for just a moment, as though bracing herself for a blow she has felt coming her entire life without ever quite knowing its shape. Ned Stark looks across the hall at Jaime Lannister. Jaime looks back at him, then at the shrieking, wine-flushed boy on the throne he has spent 15 years quietly loathing in silence, and his hand drifts, slowly, toward the hilt of his own sword. For one suspended heartbeat, every lord in that hall watching him is certain he means to cut Ned down and claim whatever mercy Viserys is offering. Instead, Jaime Lannister steps forward and plants himself shoulder to shoulder with the man who took his white cloak and chained him to a hostage's life for 15 years, his blade drawn and leveled, not at Ned, but at the Iron Throne itself. Jaime Lannister says to Viserys Targaryen, his voice carrying clean and cold across the whole stunned length of the hall, "I have already killed one mad king for this realm, your grace. I find I am rather looking forward to making it too." Behind Ned, the northern household guard finish drawing their steel. Ned Stark thinks, in the single suspended heartbeat before he moves, of a promise made to a dying sister in a tower that smelled of blood and roses. 15 years and a lifetime of borrowed peace ago. He thinks of every quiet year he spent telling himself that keeping Jon's name a secret was the same thing as keeping Jon himself safe. And of every quiet year since, when it had also, if he is honest with himself at last, been something closer to a weapon kept oiled and ready in a drawer. He understands, standing in this hall with 100 blades already half drawn around him, that he is about to learn, for the second time in his life, exactly what his own honor is actually worth, when the only currency left to spend is blood. Ned Stark says to Viserys Targaryen, drawing ice for the second time in that same throne room in his life, "You want his head, boy? You will have to take mine first, and I promise you, it will cost you a great deal more than you believe you can afford to pay." The screen fades to black as the sound of 100 swords of ways leaving their scabbards fills the sudden, ringing silence of the hall. The War of the Two Dragons has already begun, and this time, the wolves standing at its center have learned, across 15 long and bloody years, exactly how to tear out a god's throat. There were no heroes left standing in that throne room by the end of the night, only people who had waited far too long for exactly this kind of slaughter. That is our theory. In a world where honor is so often a death sentence, Eddard Stark chose once to become the executioner instead of the victim, and spent the next 15 years discovering that in the Game of Thrones, every life purchased with a king's blood carries its own separate patient bill, and someone, eventually, always comes to collect it. Did Ned Stark save the honor of the Seven Kingdoms the night he swung ice through Robert Baratheon's neck? Or did he simply delay its final collapse by 15 quiet, borrowed years? And after 15 years wearing a hostage's chain, has Jaime Lannister just chosen the wolf out of genuine loyalty, or simply because a second Mad King is the only throat left in this hall worth cutting? If you want to see the conclusion of this dark saga and find out whether Jon Snow survives a Mad King's wrath, make sure to smash that subscribe button and leave a like on this video. If we reach 7,000 likes, we will begin writing part 2, The War of the Two Dragons. Let us know in the comments. Would you have drawn your own sword to save 2 murdered children, knowing what it would cost you 15 years later? Until then, remember, the night is dark, and the North